9,000 years ago, people slept every night above the bones of the dead. The bodies were buried directly beneath the floor of the house, not in a cemetery, under the floor where they cooked, slept, and raised children.
Before we get bogged down in the archaeology, or the DNA, or the specific dates, I just want you to sit with the sheer, profound strangeness of that physical reality for a second. I mean, imagine waking up, lighting your hearth, and making breakfast, knowing for a fact that your ancestors are resting just inches below the packed dirt you're standing on. It's wild, right?
These were windowless mud brick houses with no front doors. Literally none. You actually got inside by climbing down a wooden ladder right through a hole in the roof. And down there, the living just went about their daily chores. Eating, making tools, sleeping on these raised platforms, directly over the resting places of the dead. As years went by and new members passed away, they'd break open the floors, carefully place the bodies in a tightly curled position, and then just plaster right back over them. Sometimes they even moved older bones around or removed skulls for specific rituals. The dead weren't just gone and forgotten, they were an active physical part of the household.
So to really understand why they lived like this, we have to look at what this place actually was. Çatalhöyük is considered one of the earliest large proto-urban settlements ever found. Now, what does that mean? Basically, it was a community of people who were just beginning to figure out how to live together at scale. Think about it. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans were roaming around as hunter-gatherers. But here, they were finally transitioning to permanent farming, setting down roots, and packing tightly together in one place.
And when I say packed together, I mean look at the sheer density here. There were 0 streets, there was no grand palace for a king, and no separate temple district for priests. It was just this incredibly dense, equal honeycomb of rectangular homes pressed right into the earth, built wall to wall. You literally navigated the settlement by walking across your neighbor's roofs.
At its absolute peak, researchers estimate this place was home to around 8,000 people, and they stayed here for a staggering amount of time. We are talking about 1,400 years of continuous human occupation. When a mud brick house started to crumble, they didn't just pack up and move down the road. They knocked down the upper walls, filled in the base, and built the exact same house, same proportions, same interior setup, directly on top of the old one, over and over again, generation after generation.
Now, for decades, when archaeologists excavated these homes and found dead bodies buried beneath the platforms, they naturally made a completely logical assumption. They assumed that burying bodies under the floor meant these people were biological families. The idea was that parents, grandparents, and direct descendants formed this rigid, biological blood archive. The house was basically seen as inherited property passed down through strict bloodlines. And looking at floor plans like this, with clusters of remains arranged so carefully under the sleeping and cooking platforms, you can totally see why experts propose that a house belonged to a single bloodline. I mean, it looks exactly like a private family crypt. So for a really long time, the accepted story of Çatalhöyük was simply a story of extended blood families living and dying in their ancestral homes.
But in 2025, a groundbreaking study published in Science magazine completely shook things up. Over a dozen years, an international team of researchers analyzed ancient skeletal remains from the site. They managed to successfully sequence the DNA of 131 individuals buried across 35 different houses. And what the genetics revealed? It completely fractured that old assumption.
The evidence suggests that our previous understanding was, at best, incomplete. The DNA actually showed that many of the people buried together under the exact same floorboards were not close biological relatives at all. And interestingly, the anchors of these households were actually women. The genetic comparisons indicate that maternal lines played a way more prominent role than paternal ones in connecting household members. This pushes back really heavily against the idea that male-dominated systems were just an inherent, unavoidable characteristic of early farming societies. In fact, here, men were actually more likely to move away from the house they were born into. Crucially, researchers proposed that these kinship patterns weren't just static, they shifted over time. In the early days of the settlement, the people buried in the same building often did have similar genetic compositions, suggesting houses initially were used by biological families. But later on, things changed. Individuals buried in the same building were frequently genetically unrelated. But here's the kicker. When researchers looked at dietary isotopes, they found that these unrelated people shared very similar diets. They ate much more similarly to each other than to people in the house right next door. They were living, eating, and surviving together, completely regardless of blood ties. You can also see this in the distribution of burial gifts. Young, subadult females received notably higher frequency of objects, like beads and pigments, compared to males.
Now we have to be careful here. While the data is consistent with female line household continuity, meaning the house likely passed from mother to daughter, we cannot definitively label this a proven matriarchy. What the evidence does suggest is that they maintained specific, enduring practices that heavily prioritized maternal connections and uniquely honored young women.
And just when the DNA began to really alter our understanding of these private homes, archaeologists excavating the eastern sector uncovered a brand new structure in August of 2025. This incredible discovery added a fascinating final puzzle piece to how these people viewed the afterlife. They found a spiritual mortuary building, which is now being referred to as the House of the Dead. Beneath the floor of this specific ceremonial building, researchers found the remains of 20 individuals. But unlike the regular domestic houses, these specific bodies hadn't lived and died in this space. They'd been intentionally brought from elsewhere and placed there for what appears to be a highly specialized ritual burial.
The contrast is pretty striking. For thousands of years, we focused almost entirely on the domestic dwellings. The messy, everyday spaces where people cooked and slept right above their ancestors. But the House of the Dead was totally different. It had zero domestic usage. It was a communal mortuary, adorned with painted walls and supported by platforms, seemingly dedicated to the whole settlement rather than just one household. It implies a much wider, communal approach to the dead, completely challenging the idea of isolated families just hoarding their own ancestors in private plots. Which brings us to a really profound human mirror. When you combine the DNA showing unrelated people buried under the same domestic floors with communal spaces like the House of the Dead, we are left with a massive question. If genetics didn't dictate who got buried under the family oven, what actually earned someone a place beneath the floorboards? How did they define who belonged? Well, the evidence is consistent with a society bound by shared experience rather than just shared DNA. Belonging to a house meant carrying the deep, continuous memory of the previous burials, knowing exactly who was beneath the floor when you replastered it. It meant shared daily labor, breathing the same smoky air from the hearth, and eating the exact same diet. Researchers propose that as the settlement grew, blood ties gradually lost their centrality. Instead, the community likely relied heavily on cultural practices like widespread fostering and adoption-like mechanisms. In short, they built their households through conscious choice. It turns out that the concept of a chosen family, the people you actively build a life with, who support you, who share your burdens and your meals, rather than just the ones you happen to be born to, isn't some modern invention at all. It is a fundamental human instinct that is at least 9 millennia old. These ancient people were piecing together resilient, non-biological families to survive the sheer challenges of one of the world's very first major social experiments. So, looking back at this ancient, streetless honeycomb pressed into the earth, we aren't just looking at dust and bones. We're looking at a reflection of our own enduring need for connection. And it leaves us with a deeply personal mystery to consider. If the ultimate sign of belonging is spending eternity intertwined with the daily lives of the people who survive you, who would you put beneath your floor?